Hey guys, tonight we drift along the river's edge where a wet mist turns lamplight to halos and makes the cobbles look slick enough to skate on. Please don't try. Medieval shoes are the opposite of grippy. The curfew bell has just finished its slow complaint, and the water carries the sound farther than it wants to go. You keep your pace small and steady, feeling the city thin into its specialized night quarters, those tolerated but watched streets that pretend to hide in plain sight. Here's your gentle reality check. If you stumbled into this district without knowing the rules, you probably won't survive the social math. Fees, fines, and frowns add up quicker than you do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And since we're all sharing this night together, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing the map light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk beside the river, hearing oars knock softly against worn boats and a laugh rise, then collapse, behind a shutter. The air smells of wet rope, ale yeast, and hearth smoke that forgot where it came from. Lanterns tremble above doorways, little private moons hung by people who learned the trick of making customers feel less lost. You don't make a show of watching. This district prefers visitors who notice everything and pretend they noticed nothing. A beadle's staff clicks somewhere you cannot see. It's the kind of sound that keeps order and fails to reassure. Here, life is limited to a few narrow freedoms, and even those are rented by the night. In many European towns, London Southwark is a famous example. The authorities tolerate certain houses near the water, partly because keeping the trade in one place is easier than chasing it across the city. That is your steady historical fact. Urban governments often fenced vice with rules, rather than believing they could erase it, and they collected revenue along the fence. You pass a doorway where the paint once tried to be cheerful. The sign above it is a symbol, not a sentence. Literacy is expensive, but pictures get the point across. The cobbles remember everything. Feet that left in a hurry, and feet that learn to move like fog. You move like fog. A shawl tail snaps in a draft and you catch, for a moment, the calm choreography that makes the night workable. Door half open, door half closed, a glance traded with the person who minds the tally book. Inside, someone is warming a basin, and somewhere else, someone is counting coins twice, because the house cut is a patient creature. A cat lands from a windowsill with the kind of authority that only cats and tax clerks fully master. You pass a bathhouse where steam breathes under the eaves, and the scent of rosemary tries to apologize for the river. Oil lamps turn the vapor into soft gold weather. People call these places stews, which sounds like dinner and also like trouble, and they are, in a civic way, a bit of both. Warm water, food, conversation, and the careful, curtained privacy that makes officials nervous. Historians still argue whether the bathhouses began chiefly as hygienic, social spaces that only later gathered their reputation, or whether the steam was always a screen for a trade the city preferred to regulate rather than shout about. You do not settle the argument, you file it away like a loose bead in a pocket. A watchman passes and pretends not to see you pretending not to see him. That is the rhythm here. If everyone behaves, nobody has to be dramatic. The curfew bell fades into the splash of oars, and you notice the small waistline of the streets, how the buildings lean like neighbors whispering. A doorway opens just enough for a silhouette to slip through. The latch rests, patient, on its iron tongue. Someone laughs again, softer this time, as if practicing courtesy. You smile. Courtesy is the most affordable luxury in any century. Ahead, a woman ties a yellow kerchief with the same neatness a scribe ties ribbon around a document. She is not ashamed of color. She is obeying it. In some towns, sumptuary rules require clear markers, not for her comfort, but for everyone else's certainty. It is a detail the city insists on, and she lives with it like weather. A fringe fact, whispered more than written, says that in one famous riverside parish, the women were nicknamed after a distant bishop's see. People are always inventing labels to make other lives sound far away. The nickname sticks like river mud to a shoe. You pause by a low wall, where the stone is clean in the shape of a hand. Many hands pause there. A detail floats up and makes you quietly smile. In places like this, the best business card is not a card, but the consistent glow of a clean window and the absence of a shout. A small joke lands in your head. Street signage here should read, "Welcome, but let's all pretend we bumped into each other by accident." You keep moving. The river keeps moving. Even the fog acts busy. From a doorway, warmth reaches you as if the night itself were offering a blanket. A house voice, neither friendly nor unfriendly, asks a practical question you were not planning to answer. You answer with a nod that means, "Not tonight," which is a phrase this district understands in every language. The voice accepts it. Most people hear traffic in comprehension as much as coin. Misunderstanding is expensive. A second joke, gentle as a folded towel, tells you that medieval customer service would rate 5 stars for clarity and 2 stars for shoes. Farther along, an alley bends toward a tiny yard where laundry strains itself dry on a rope between 2 nails. Someone inside coughs, then settles. A sparrow does the same. The city exhales, and you learn to exhale with it. This is not a walk of scandal, but a walk of systems, rules, seasons, tallies, and the human wish to get through the night with dignity. If you listen closely, you can hear the arithmetic: rent, bread, soap, candles, and the coin that must be saved for when the bell says, "Not tonight," for weeks at a time. The arithmetic is a stern tutor, but it teaches survival. You reach the end of the lane, where the river briefly shows a seam of silver between boats. The air tastes like iron and sleep. Behind you, the district continues doing what it does best, keeping its balance. Ahead of you, morning is not yet an opinion. It is just a rumor that the lamps keep denying. You keep your pace small and steady, and the city lets you pass. You follow the mist as it braids itself around the river wall and then thins into a lane where signs do their work quietly. A wooden board creaks on 2 rings. Nothing written, only a painted token. Maybe a sprig of rosemary, maybe a little red cap. Because pictures speak to everyone and cause fewer arguments with clerks. The next doorway wears no emblem at all, which is itself a message. Privacy offered, not promised. Overhead, the curfew bell rolls a last echo across the roofs, and the sound feels like a blanket being tucked in over the whole quarter. Curfew is the city's bedtime story. It does not ask, it instructs. You know the drill. Shutters first, then lamps lower, then voices slow. The bell once meant cover your fire, a practical warning in streets where timber leans across the sky and straw thinks every spark is an invitation. That's your straightforward historical fact. The bell's name in old tongues points to banking hearths and preventing night fires, a safety rule that later pulls double duty as moral supervision. A watchman's step taps the thought into place, measured, unhurried, certain that everyone here understands that certainty is the point. At the lane's mouth, a small post carries a city seal, worn, but legible if you let your fingers feel the grooves. The seal is less about literature and more about geography. What lies beyond is allowed only here and only now, and never after the last peal. You can map the rules by the hardware. Shutters reinforced with a second bar. Door latches whose iron has been handled to a polish, and the little holes in curtains where people watch without committing to the act. Another sign swings faintly and reveals a paler rectangle on the plank where someone scraped away an older emblem. Rebranding is not a modern vice. Even medieval neighborhoods understand the power of a new name. You pass a low arch where a beadle's staff hangs horizontally like an underline. Beneath it, a pasted strip of parchment lists the house rules in phrases so brief they might be poetry. No brawling, no blades, no shouting, no cheating the tally, no borrowing the furniture, no complaining to the neighbors. Somewhere a cough turns into a laugh, and then into the soft small talk of people who plan to pretend they never met. You find yourself smiling. Customer service in these lanes is a masterpiece of understatement. First joke of the night. The bell is basically the medieval Wi-Fi off switch. After it tolls, the network goes into sleepy mode, and everyone pretends to have forgotten their passwords. Lamplight catches a pair of chalk marks on the cobbles, set at ankle width like the memory of a banister. They aren't official, just the work of someone who enjoys order. The chalk is at once invitation and warning. Here is the threshold. Step lightly. The city loves lines you can cross only if you agree to notice them. You agree for now. A boy with a kind of lawful mischief in his walk darts by with a basket. Bread heels, maybe a jar of ale. Probably a note no one will ever admit existed. He vanishes through a side door that never quite closes, but always clicks as if it had. The bell's last tremor is still in your ribs when the watchman reappears, his lantern hooded to a sliver. He nods because nodding is quicker than paperwork. A second. Quieter signal follows. 2 raps on wood from somewhere up a stair, then 1 rap back from below. That choreography is the language of peace in this place. You think of how rules produce not so much silence as predictable hum. Historians still argue whether the curfew in districts like this served fire safety first, moral policing second, or the other way around. You get the feeling that at street level, people cared less about motives than about not paying fines. A tavern 2 doors down has sand sprinkled across its floor to drink the spills. The sand darkens where feet turn sharply. Evidence of frequent decisions to leave before the bell or to stay just after it. A choice whose price increases with every ring. Above the tavern sign, a painted symbol shows a cardinal's hat with a feather comically large for human dignity. The quirky tidbit the lane wants to share is this. House and tavern names in these neighborhoods were often grand or cheeky, animals, crowns, church hats, because icons travel faster than rumors and are easier to recognize at dusk. You can navigate an entire night on pictures and bells alone. A clerk passes with a ledger pressed to his chest like a loaf. He walks as if numbers might bruise. He will note who closed on time, who didn't, and who borrowed 2 candles and returned 1.5 by claiming the wick shrank. This is the mathematics of tolerance. The city tolerates so long as the arithmetic balances. Your second joke arrives politely and takes off its shoes. Every bureau dreams of being a monastery scriptorium, until someone spills ale on the ledger, and then the dream wakes up. By another doorway, a small square of yellow cloth is thumbtacked to the jamb, a legal courtesy, visible by lantern and moon. In some towns, markers like that are required, a way to announce status without forcing speech. You watch a woman adjust her own kerchief with swift, practiced hands. She is not advertising. She is complying. The difference keeps the bell from ringing again. Someone has chalked a little heart on the jamb below the cloth, and someone else has drawn an X through it, and someone else has drawn a smaller heart inside the X, as if compromise were the true heraldry of the street. The lane narrows until doorsteps bite into the passage, and drain pipes dribble into bowls. You learn to walk with your shoulders tucked and your attention wide. You notice how sound changes after curfew. Laughter rolls under doors instead of out of windows. Heels speak in whispers. A lute tries one brave phrase and then remembers the time. The river keeps time with the soft slap of water on the quay. The city's roofline is a black comb against a silver night, and the mist catches in its teeth. At a corner, a scrap of parchment flaps on a nail and almost tells you something. You steady it and read a reminder about holy days and shutters. In a hand that tried to be severe and ended up a little tired. The rule is clear. On certain nights the lane is a corridor without purpose, and the bell is a lock. You fold the scrap back down and let it pretend it never left. Your third, sleep-soft joke. Somewhere an official believes these notices are read at noon with spectacles and tea. In reality, they're read at midnight with one eye and a shrug. At last the lane exhales into a tiny square where 3 signs meet the air like quiet flags. None of them brag. The city has fenced the trade neatly into these arteries, not to celebrate it, but to keep it from spilling into places that prefer their night unquestioned. You stand a moment, learning the traffic of voices behind shutters, the rhythm of lanterns as they tilt and right themselves, the way bells can draw a boundary without a single rope on the ground. You carry the map in your ears and then in your feet, and the rules carry you along with the gentlest push. The door closes behind you with a soft wooden sentence, and the room finishes it with a sigh. You stand still until your eyes learn the grammar of low light, a strip of moon along the sill, a lantern halo where the wick hums, and shadows stacked neatly in the corners like folded blankets. The air carries timber, lanolin, and a thread of rosemary from someone's pocket sprig. You breathe slower. The room breathes with you. There is a bed, really a frame with rope laced side to side, a grid that has earned its knots. Upon it sits a palliasse, a straw mattress that rustles when you press a hand, and a woolen blanket that has memorized the shape of every winter. That steady historical fact settles like a second pillow. Most ordinary townsfolk slept on straw ticks and under wool, reserving fine linen sheets and featherbeds for wealthier homes or special houses. Ropes sagged through the week and were tightened with a little wrench before sleep. You run your fingertips along the rope and find the place where the peg bites. Tight rope, quiet night. Loose rope, wandering dreams, and the slow roll to the middle that makes 2 sleepers 1 complaint. Your first soft joke smiles and keeps its shoes by the door. The bed is a medieval hammock with performance reviews. Near the bed stands a wooden chest, pale where hands have polished it, and darker where rain once found it on moving day. The latch is bright with use. The hasp clicks like a reminder that silver likes company. Inside live clothes, a spare kerchief, a bundle of thread, perhaps a little coin tied in scrap linen, and a comb with more stories than teeth. Lid raised, you notice 2 rows of tiny tally cuts near the hinge, rent days counted with quiet honesty. The chest doubles as a stool, a table, and sometimes a fort, when the world needs you to hide your heart for an hour. Historians still argue whether affordable locks for such chests were common among the working poor in different regions, or whether a stout hasp and vigilant neighbors did most of the protecting. You suspect the answer changes with the street. On the floor, rushes cover the boards in a polite crowd, mixed with a handful of strewing herbs, marjoram, a little mint, just enough to make the place smell like good intentions. By the hearth, a brick wrapped in cloth gives off the last of its warmth, a traveling sun that was tucked into the bed earlier so your feet would forgive the century. That little brick is your quirky tidbit. Humble rooms often used a warmed stone or brick as a safer cousin to the fancy warming pan. It does the job slowly and never argues with sparks. You slide the brick aside and listen as it cools with a tiny crackle, like breadcrumbs in a pan. The lantern is tallow, thick and practical. Beeswax would burn cleaner, but beeswax belongs to wealth and churches. This night belongs to sweet and patience. The smoke draws a faint gray feather on the beam. You trim the wick with a pinch twist, and the light steadies. Shadows adjust their hats. Outside, the river tries on a different tempo, and the mist lets a boat pretend to be a cloud. You sit on the bed and feel the straw redistribute as if it were learning your name. The palliasse holds last season's oat whispers. Every few weeks the straw is fluffed or replaced, depending on coin and on tolerance for tiny roommates. To discourage the small biters, someone stitched a narrow sachet and tucked it near the edge. Lavender if lucky, rue if serious, rosemary if hopeful. You press your palm to the blanket and feel lanolin's memory, a soft stubbornness against damp. The room isn't luxurious, but it is arranged like a sentence that doesn't waste words. Under the bed waits a chamber pot, white and honest, because midnight stares are cruel. Its presence is as domestically medieval as bread itself. Disposal follows rules, and morning is the appointed hour for regret. A pitcher and bowl on the chest offer a hopeful wash. Water never tastes as young as it does at dawn. A square of soap sits beside them with the tilting dignity of a small moon. You lift it and catch the clean bite of lye tempered by ash and a few brave petals that lost their argument with saponification months ago. Against the far wall, a peg rack holds a gown, an apron, and a shawl, all hung so seams can rest. A yellow kerchief is folded into a precise triangle with the care you give to things that both mark you and protect you. You can tell the gown has been turned, its hem unpicked and reversed, so that old wear pretends to be new. The sleeves show the story of hands, mending at the places where work rubs life thin and then thick again. The shawl smells faintly of outside and the day's steam, and you give it a shake that is half affection. The bedropes groan again, friendly in their fatigue. You look for the bedstaff, a flat stick tucked by the frame, to smooth the tick and shepherd straw back to the corners where it likes to escape. Some nights the staff plays diplomat between blanket and foot, and some nights it's a polite reminder to share the warmth even when sleep wants to hoard it. Your second joke pads by in its stockings. Interior design here means your stick has a resume. You tuck the staff back and feel the room relax. The curtain at the window is thick enough to argue with the moon, but not so proud that it wins. You pull it half across, and the remaining light rounds the edges of everything into gentleness. The latch on the door is a simple tongue and a keeper. It does not promise the kind of safety that gathers headlines, only the kind that helps breath slow down. Somewhere in the wall, a mouse reconsiders a plan. Somewhere in the street, a familiar footfall tells you which neighbor snores and which one sings. You lie back, and the straw adjusts again in a polite chorus. The blanket comes up, the lantern lowers to a whisper, and the room reaches the temperature of a remembered hand. You count the beams above like a calendar that refuses to hurry. The chest rests, lock forward, as if keeping watch. In the space between your ear and the pillow, you hear what the city forgets to hide: small water, distant bells, the private grammar of wood. This is a life built from materials that admit their age and keep offering service: rope, straw, wool, iron, and the patience to make them last. Your third joke yawns and tucks itself in. The mattress writes tiny letters to your back, and every letter says, "You're doing fine." Morning happens slowly, like someone tilting a bowl until light spills over the rim. The lantern is out, the window is a pale slate, and the room holds its breath while the river stirs outside. You sit up, test the ropes with a heel, and feel the mattress answer in straw syllables. The first work of the day is not grand. Cleanliness never is. But it decides whether the house runs like a prayer or like a complaint. You fold the blanket back along its remembered crease, pat the tick into courtesy, and reach for the linen that kept your skin honest through the night. Linen is the daily miracle. Cool in heat, forgiving in chill, and washable in a century that asks a lot of cloth. That steady historical fact waits where you left it. In towns across Europe, ordinary people prized linens because they could be laundered often, even when outer woolens were brushed and aired rather than soaked. Shirt or shift against the skin did most of the hygienic work. You shake the garment and the morning answers with a small dust of dreams. The hem tells you where the world touched yesterday. You roll sleeves like a promise and make a tidy bundle for the wash. The house has a rhythm to these tasks. A basin for quick rinses, a larger tub in the yard for the real work, and a rope that runs from nail to nail like a staff line waiting for notes. You fetch water that still remembers the bucket's last argument with the river steps. Steam is a luxury for later. Now the chill is part of the wake-up. You add a sliver of yesterday's soap, a modest moon that survived the dark. It softens into the water like an apology. You smile at the way the scent, faint lie, ghostly herbs, announces clean, without asking anyone's opinion. When the larger wash comes due, there is a routine with buckets and neighbors and the little theater by the water's edge. Sometimes you buck the linen, soak it in a lye solution poured through a basket of ashes, because stains respect chemistry even when people don't. Other days you enlist the laundress down by the riverside, where paddles beat rhythm into the current and gossip floats faster than foam. Historians still argue whether riverside washing in busy quarters spread more filth than it conquered, or whether the constant flow and early morning timing kept things within the city's practical standards. You suspect the answer changes with the current and with how many people remembered to lift their buckets upstream. You scrub seams where they kiss the day's work: collar, underarm, cuff, those patient zones where skin trades stories with fabric. Your first light joke shuffles in and hangs its cloak by the door. The cuff always tells on you. It's the town crier of sleeves. Rinsing, you watch the water cloud and then clarify. A little morality play in a tub. You twist, not too hard, because linen loves stamina more than heroics. A clean cloth snaps like a small flag, and the rope welcomes its first note of the morning. Mending belongs to the same hymn. You thread a needle with the certainty that tiny acts prevent expensive ones. The gown's hem has flirted with a splinter and needs a word in private. The apron has a new ambition to become two aprons and must be talked out of it. The yellow kerchief earns a smoothing and a refold so crisp it could teach geometry. Your second gentle joke stretches and yawns. The kerchief has stricter right angles than some city maps. Each stitch is a whisper to the future you. I took care of this so you won't have to. And the fabric seems to stand taller under your hand. Air moves through the room, polite at first, then helpful. You prop the door with the warming brick, now cold, but still devoted. Outside, a neighbor shakes a rug with the resigned elegance of a duchess, and a cat supervises without credentials. Bells from the parish sound. Lauds, that thin golden hour between first hunger and first bread. You read the bells by habit. Early services mean the market will gather pace soon, and your own errands must fit inside the city's choreography. You set the chamber pot aside for its outdoor appointment. There are rules for that too, because civility is a team sport, and replace it with an empty bucket like a promise to the floorboards. In the yard, the tub stands where it always stands, a small planet with its own weather. You lay the linen in and press gently, not drowning it, but persuading it to reconsider yesterday. Soap bubbles make the kind of shine you only see when the sun is still thinking. You add a splash from a jug with a very honest label in your head. Stale urine. Lent. The harsh helper no one praises in poetry. That's your quirky tidbit. Ammonia in fermented urine was commonly used as a cleaning agent. Dyers and fullers knew it by scent and by results. You stir like a cook with a secret and try not to imagine the ballads. Back inside, you tackle the quick tidy that keeps the house ledger light. Tables wiped with a twist of damp cloth, chest lid dusted, rushes straightened. Order is its own fragrance. The tally book on the shelf glances at you as if to say that clean rooms pay smaller fines. It isn't wrong. City oversight doesn't visit as often where surfaces shine, and neighbor complaints stay theoretical. The house rules, no shouting, no losing track of candles, no carelessness with linens, aren't abstractions. They're the quiet difference between predictable rent and sudden penalties. You check the bed ropes again and give the key a quarter turn. The frame tightens like a polite smile held just so. A well-tuned bed makes fewer midnight remarks and promises fewer morning aches. Your third soft joke pads by on felted feet. The bed frame is a musician, and you are the tuner who saves the audience from creaks in the third act. You smooth the blanket, plump the straw with the bed staff, and feel the room tip from slept in to ready. By the window, cloth lifts on the line with that particular optimism of laundry, the belief that sun exists even on shy mornings. The first pieces drip into the yard in bright syllables. Sleeve, hem, corner, corner. You pin each by habit, wood against fiber against light. A breeze finds them, and they answer with a flapping that sounds like applause from very polite hands. You allow yourself a breath you didn't know you were saving. Clean things have a way of quieting the mind without asking it to be proud. Down the lane, you hear the river bargain with oars, and a fishmonger rehearse prices to an audience of gulls. The city's day trade is sharpening its chalk. You tie your apron, set the room to rights, and tuck the needle back into its little cloth book, like a knight sheathing a sword far too brave for its size. The air now tastes of soap in the future. You carry the bucket outside, return with it empty, and let the door's latch land with the confidence of a task well begun. Cleanliness will not make the world kind, but it can make it manageable. A fresh shift between skin and wool is the day's truce. Your share of order traded for the city's promise not to notice you too loudly. You gather the remaining cloth, the mended edge tugging slightly with pride, and feel the room lean into usefulness. Morning has finished happening. Now the work can start being worth it. Steam greets you like a polite host with warm hands, rising from tubs banded in iron, and from a copper cauldron that sighs over the fire in the back room. The timber walls have learned to glisten. Beads of water line up on the planks like tiny pilgrims. The air tastes of rosemary and mint, with a shy note of soap that pretends it was here all along. You pay your coin at a counter that was once a bench and is now, by attitude, a desk. A towel arrives with the gravity of a treaty, and a wooden clog taps your ankle as if to say, "Protect your souls." You oblige. Wet floors are loyal to no one. The room speaks in two languages, splash and whisper. Curtains divide corners into small negotiations with privacy, and the main space opens like a public square that forgot about weather. An attendant moves from tub to tub with a ladle as long as an argument, tempering heat, adding a scoop of herb infusion where a cough lingers, topping up the bath that tries to imitate a caress. Your steady historical fact floats easily here. Across medieval towns, especially in England's Southwark along the river, bathhouses known as stews offered hot water, food or drink, and curtained chambers. Authorities tolerated and taxed them, and they were ordered to close during Lent. The rule rests on the shelf beside the towels as if it were folded linen. You lower yourself into the water and discover the particular music of a wooden tub. Creak, sigh, hush. As your weight becomes a topic the planks are willing to discuss. Heat rises into your bones with the good manners of a practiced guest. A felt cap perches on your head. A soft helmet against dizziness. That's your quirky tidbit for the evening. Bathers sometimes wore caps to keep the head cool, while the rest of the body settled into warmth. A small trick that makes long soaks less dramatic. You smile at your reflection and at the cap's refusal to be fashionable. Steam is its own kind of kindness. It blurs imperfections on purpose. Voices drift like low birds. A lute plucks a shy measure before deciding the humidity prefers silence. A serving girl sets down a tray with small beer and bread that is better for being simple. You brace the cup on the tub's rim and watch the surface ripple with the city's second heartbeat. In a corner, someone laughs the way a window opens, carefully, then a bit more. That is the social mathematics at work. Water makes a room honest, and warmth makes patience. Your first light joke floats up like a bubble and pops itself politely. This is the rare venue where small talk is literally dampened for your comfort. The steward, call him a bathman tonight, keeps a ledger with the frown of a man who has learned that water evaporates and so does profit. His stick of charcoal tastes each page. He notes who paid for extra heat, who borrowed a second towel, who asked for rosemary and received mint without complaint. On the wall near his elbow hangs a neat list of house rules. No shouting, no rough handling, no blades, no candles near curtains, and no monopolizing the best corner. The paper curls at the edges like it has heard every excuse and remains unconvinced. Through the steam, the architecture reveals itself only in sketches. A timber post here, a brace there, a dark beam crossed with lighter repairs. The floor is sanded in places to catch drips and confessions. You feel the room's age in the way the tub knows when to stop complaining. Historians still argue whether these bathhouses began chiefly as hygienic social spaces that gathered other services over time, or whether civic regulation shaped them from the start as multitasking institutions. Warmth, washing, eating, and discreet commerce under one roof. You're not here to judge the blueprint. You're here to notice how people keep themselves human in an era that expects thrift from every object and patience from every person. From somewhere behind, a bucket of hot water arrives with the dignity of a promotion. It pours into your tub in a ribbon that speaks directly to your spine. You tilt your head back and watch a bead of condensation run the beam like a tiny pilgrim seeking a shrine. The cap keeps you steady. The cup keeps you honest. The water keeps its word. Another attendant brings a small cloth packet, herbs crushed by a mortar that believes in quiet miracles, and drops it to steep beside your knee. Rosemary declares itself. Thyme votes aye. Mint refuses to be subtle. You inhale, and your lungs reply with applause you keep to yourself. In a recess, a pair of women negotiate towel space with the elegance of diplomats who prefer not to sign anything. They share a comb, a mirror the size of a biscuit, and the kind of laughter that polishes brass. Across the room, a sailor invents a song and immediately forgets it in favor of finishing his ale. The bathman notices a candle leaning toward trouble and pinches its ambition with a wetted thumb. Your second gentle joke raises an eyebrow. If candles had resumes, every bathhouse would list crisis manager under special skills. Water is a generous teacher. It reminds you that bodies are not just tools for work, but homes for breath. You let your shoulders sink to the sentence where tension runs out of words. The tub's rim cools your wrists. Somewhere outside, a cart creaks. Somewhere inside, a kettle agrees to boil again. You think of how this room stitches the city's frayed edges, sailor to washerwoman, clerk to carter, offering a brief treaty in steam. The bath is not a cure, but it is an argument for trying. There is risk here too, acknowledged by the neatness of the towels and the quickness of the mop. Warmth and crowd invite more than stories. The city knows this, and its rules wear a practical face. Clean water is fetched and changed. Shared cloth is washed with more diligence than romance. Attendants lean toward health with the ordinary heroism of routine. People whisper, people choose, people leave their decisions behind with the steam. Most will go home with skin less tight, lungs less dusty, and a towel that remembers their spine. When you rise, the air feels like a cool hand smoothing handwriting. The towel behaves with a discipline that linen prides itself on. You return the cap and thank it for doing a job no one praises. The bathman nods without wasting a word. Your third soft joke shakes itself dry. The tub deserves a tip for listening without interrupting. You step back into clogs that saved your pride from the floor, and the room, like a good friend, lets you go without a fuss. The door opens to the lane, and night finds you again, but less sternly. Your breath draws easier, like a rope just tightened. Behind you, steam climbs the eaves and turns to night air with hardly a protest. You carry the warmth under your shawl the way one carries a secret that intends to become sleep. Bells from far across the water test a note and then keep it. You walk back into the city's cool grammar, and the syllables of the bath linger on your skin. Hush, heat, herb, home. You dress with the unhurried precision of someone who knows that fabric is also paperwork. The gown waits on its peg, the apron folds like a rehearsed bow, and the yellow kerchief lies on the chest with the crisp authority of a stamped seal. You lift the linen shift first, clean, cool, newly convinced of its purpose, then coax the wool over it, and the morning settles around your shoulders like good advice. The mirror is a polished scrap of tin that tells the truth kindly. You tilt it, not to chase beauty, but to make sure the signals read correctly from the street. Here is the steady historical fact. Many medieval towns required distinctive dress for women in this trade. Kerchiefs or hoods in yellow or striped cloth, bands on fine veils and silks, and sometimes a visible badge, so that status could be recognized at a glance by watchmen and neighbors. The color is not chosen for tenderness, it is a civic highlighter. Some writers even tie yellow's sting to Judas in church art, others to the garish dyes sold cheaply in market lanes. The rule varies by city, and so does its zeal. Historians still argue whether such sumptuary laws were uniformly enforced or mostly symbolic theater, a way for authorities to claim control while real life negotiated around the edges with pins and pleats. You fold the kerchief once, then twice, and knot it so the point sits neat as a quill behind your ear. The cloth is ordinary but stubborn, a fabric that keeps its promises through heat, mist, and the occasional doorway breeze that wants to interview your hair. The knot is not a flourish. It's a contract, visible, legible, and importantly, adjustable if the day's work demands discretion. Your first light joke ties itself with you. You are, in essence, wearing city ordinances on your head, so clerks don't have to carry them around. Next comes the belt. A strip of leather softened by years of explaining gravity to skirts. You thread it through the gown's eyelets and settle it at your waist, where it can make introductions between you and the day. From the belt hangs the small world you need. A pouch for coins, a key on a thong, a tiny knife polite enough for apples and rude enough for rope, maybe a rosary or a few counting beads that double as something to do with your hands when a cue grows talkative. The pouch is your companion. It says ready, without saying rich. You draw the mouth cords tight and feel the reassurance of familiar weight. The pouch itself bears a pragmatic elegance. Leather if you can, sturdy cloth if you must, sometimes lined with a scrap of smoother fabric so coins don't argue with the stitches. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some people tucked a sprig of lavender or rue inside small purses to scent away the tang of metal, and the other, humbler odors that travel with busy streets. A pouch that smells like a herb garden tells the day you prepared for it. You run a thumb along the seam where you reinforced it last week, and marvel, again, at how a handful of thread can talk thieves out of trying. You check the hem the way sailors check rigging, where the work rubs, at the apron, at the sleeve, along the side where a belt rubs the wool. You look for thin places that will become problems if ignored. The apron ties in front so hands can undo it quickly if steam or spills make opinions. Its purpose is as clear as the sun. Protect the gown. Lend you a pocket's worth of bravery. Give you a surface to wipe the moment from your fingers. You roll the edges of the sleeves so cuffs don't drink the day. Your second soft joke glances at the mirror. Your wardrobe isn't fashion, it's an operations manual with buttons. On the chest lid sits a small packet of pins, shining like well-behaved stars. Pins are intelligence. They hold the story together. A fast one at the shoulder fixes the kerchief against ambition. 2 more tame the apron's insistence on leaning left. You adjust until everything feels like you could forget it, which is the mark of an outfit that works. The yellow reads clearly, but not loudly. You have learned the difference. Cloth can announce without shouting. By habit, you test closures like a locksmith. The pouch cords cinch. The belt tongue seats in its hole. The knife sheath lets the blade rest without plotting an escape. You slip 1 coin into the small hidden pocket you sewed behind the belt seam, a secret against a bad night or a good opportunity. An extra tie runs from pouch to belt, so a quick hand meets a surprise. That is the arithmetic of safety: cords, knots, backups, and the humility to assume you might be distracted by a voice that needs listening. A neighbor appears in the doorway with her own kerchief tied in a variation learned from an aunt in another town. The fold speaks a dialect. So do the colors of her gown's trim, the wear on her shoes, the set of her shoulders. She jokes that if yellow ever goes out of regulation, you could both open a dye shop and retire wealthy on the town's appetite for unpleasant shades. You both laugh because laughter is lighter than bread and travels faster. Your third gentle joke follows it out to the yard. Somewhere a councilman believes regulation invented color, and the dyers are too polite to correct him. You lift the pouch and feel the modest choreography of coin against coin. A few pennies. Maybe a larger piece for rent, a lead token or 2 from the bathhouse that owes you a hot bowl after a long shift. Those tokens are the city's IOUs, lighter than promises and more useful. The belt rests where it should, not too tight, not loose enough to make mischief. You swing your cloak over one arm and realize it has remembered last winter's fold. Fabric, like people, keeps the habits you treat kindly. Before the door, you pause. The kerchief shows what it must. The gown sits honest. The apron looks ready to spill grace on careless moments. You step into your shoes, sturdy, round-toed, the leather dark with weather and oil, and your feet thank last night's clogs for keeping them out of trouble. Outside, the lane studies your silhouette and decides you belong to it in the precise way that keeps peace. Visible, comprehensible, lawful enough to be left alone. And then you are moving, belt gentle at your waist, pouch quiet at your side, kerchief steady above thoughts that are your own. The dress code has done its work. It marks you without erasing you. The day takes its first full breath, and you match it, ready to spend coin where it matters and save coin where it counts. The pouch at your waist has opinions, and tonight it asks to be consulted. You step to the table where a stub of candle makes its own small sun, draw the cord, and spill the day into a circle of light. A few pennies with faces rubbed nearly into rumor, a clipped groat that still believes in itself, and 2 lead tokens stamped with a lazy mermaid from the bathhouse that pays part of its debts and promises. Coins are small, but their voices are loud. You shush them with your palm and begin the nightly arithmetic that keeps roofs above heads and soup inside bowls. First come the tallies. The house uses a short hazel stick split lengthwise, each side notched to mark rent and the cut for the rooms and candles. Your share is the foil. The house keeps the stock. When the 2 halves match, the account behaves. That's your straightforward historical fact. From taverns to the Royal Exchequer, tally sticks recorded debts and payments by paired notches and splits, a system hard to forge because only the original halves fit. The hasp on the rent chest clicks when the stick slides in. The sound is as domestic here as a kettle's first sigh. You line up the night's pennies and teach them to behave. 2 for rent, 1 for candles and lamp trim, 1 for the bathman who lets ledgers breathe, 1 for the beadle who prefers civility to paperwork, and 1 for soap because clean cloth pays dividends no sermon ever mentions. Your first gentle joke clears its throat. Numbers are just gossip with better manners. You stack the remaining coins and feel their small courage warm your palm. Not wealth, but something like sturdiness. Enough to face bread. Perhaps a bit of cheese if the market smiled, and a future that at least listens when you speak. Supper is the ledger's favorite footnote. You trade a token at the stew for a bowl of barley pottage, thick with what the day can spare. Leeks if the garden won, pulses if the merchant sold kindly, a sliver of bacon if fortune winked. A heel of bread leans on the rim like a friend who promises to walk you home and actually does. In many towns, the assize of bread and ale, or its local cousins, fixed prices and weights so bakers and brewers could not blame the moon for greed. That rule, sometimes loudly enforced and sometimes sleepily ignored, is the quiet spine of honest appetite. You drizzle a memory of drippings from yesterday and decide the bowl is better than your mood deserves. You taste the ale, small and sensible. Brewed for thirst, not for drama. It carries the day's straw dust away from your throat and gives your chest permission to loosen. A peg tankard on the shelf, one of those mugs with pegs to show how much each person should drink, pretends not to be watching. Here's your quirky tidbit. Peg tankards helped households and taverns ration courtesy and prevent a merry brawl from turning expensive. When you drank to the next peg, you had done your duty and preserved both friendship and furniture. You lift your cup like a citizen who loves both. Across the table sits the little book that keeps the house honest, its pages a parade of sums and initials. You add your marks and note which expenses are coming. Boot soles before rain remembers your name. New pins before the kerchief invents independence. A ribbon of thread, because hems are what keep dignity from tripping. A question wanders through. Do you tuck a coin aside for savings, that imagined alehouse with clean tables, or a winter cloak that doesn't apologize? Or do you pay down a debt that prefers not to sleep? Historians still argue whether women in this trade, on average and outside the gilded circles of courtesans, earned reliably more than domestic servants once house cuts, fines, and closures were counted. Ledgers like yours whisper that the answer changes with the street and with the season. You make room for fees that arrive like weather. There's the house cut, patient and exact, that pays for candles, linenware, mops, and the silence that neighbors prefer. There's the casual tithe to maintenance, the hinge that needs a nail, the latch that wants oil, the warm brick that cracked in loud sympathy with the frost. There is the unofficial cost of safety, a cup for the watchman who values quiet, a loaf for the widow who sees everything and speaks only when her bread is sweet. None of this is on parchment, yet all of it is binding. The coins wait while you decide how much to feed tomorrow. You fold 2 pennies into a scrap of cloth and slide them into the hidden pocket you stitched behind the belt seam. It is not much, but it is pointed in the direction of mercy. Your second soft joke peeks over the bowl. Savings are just future. You writing thank you notes to present you. You swallow the last mouthful of pottage and feel it settle like an agreement signed in warmth. You run a thumb along the clipped edge of the groat and think of how coin clipping makes everyone into an amateur metallurgist. A groat that has dieted too long earns side-eye from a suspicious baker. A newer coin shines loudly and attracts the kind of attention that adds arithmetic to your walk. Tokens, meanwhile, are light as lies and sometimes just as useful. Bathhouses, taverns, even some market stalls hand them out when cash is shy or when the owner likes to keep a circle of customers loyal. You tuck the mermaid tokens back with a resigned affection. Promises have their place. Soup counts as payment for many injustices. At the door, a breeze ruffles the tally stick jar and reminds you to plan for closures. Lent will come with its polite refusal, shutters will lower early, and the city will pretend this quarter never existed for a handful of weeks. That is when hidden coins prove their religion. You pencil a quieter month into your head and decide which errands can wait, which must not, and which can be replaced with ingenuity. Old boots greased into new courtesy, a shawl darned into confidence, a friend trading mending for a borrowed hearth. The city loves a budget that owns a needle. You wipe the table with a cloth that knows how numbers smear and set the candle end into its socket with the tenderness that small fires enjoy. Outside, a bell tests the air and decides not to argue. The lane smells of yeast and damp stone. An agreeable treaty after the day's negotiations. You return the coins to their pouch, patient as seeds, and tie the cord with a knot learned from someone who took knots seriously. Your third gentle joke closes the ledger. Mathematics is just storytelling that refuses to forget the ending. You smile because tonight at least, the story lands on its feet. The pouch settles against your waist. The room exhales. Supper becomes sleep's kindest usher, and the ledger becomes a closed eye that still listens. You bank the candle, feel the house accept the darkness like a familiar cloak, and carry the quiet forward, coin by coin, breath by breath, into a night that promises, modestly, credibly, to hold. Rules arrive in this quarter the way dew does, quietly, everywhere, and with a talent for making surfaces behave. You learn to read them like weather. A parchment nailed beside a doorway gives you the headlines in ink that has outlasted the scribe's patience. No brawling, no blades, no dice, no shouting from windows, shutters by curfew, closed on holy nights, and absolutely no cheating the tally. Beneath the rules hangs a smaller sheet in a firmer hand. Fines listed in coins, and, for the parish-minded, fines in wax. So many ounces owed to the altar if anyone forgets how candles and straw negotiate. That's your quirky tidbit. In some towns, minor penalties could be paid partly in wax to supply church candles, a tidy marriage of light and law. A beadle strolls by with the slow authority of a man whose staff ends in iron and whose boots don't mind puddles. He wears a tabard with the city's device stitched in stubborn thread. The emblem is less fashion than announcement. Somebody is watching, and the knight should take that kindly. He tips his staff toward the posted rules and gives you the look of a schoolmaster who expects you to have read ahead. You nod because nodding is cheaper than conversation and more reliable than promises. First light joke of the evening. Civic compliance is a language where nods are the vowels and fees are the consonants. Inside the hall, a clerk keeps a register whose spine has learned endurance. He copies names, real, borrowed, and improved, with a quill that intends to live forever. The city does not love chaos. It prefers addresses, amounts, and predictable rhythms. Here's your steady historical fact. In several European towns, think Southwark along the Thames or Frauenhäuser in German cities, authorities tolerated and regulated brothels, levying fees, imposing closures during Lent, and posting house rules that forbade weapons, fighting, and sometimes the presence of married women. The clerk does not recite the statutes. He merely invites you to exist inside them without drama. Oversight has its subgenres. There's the practical kind, the one that checks for covered lamps, clean linens, and a floor that won't embarrass shoes. There's the financial kind, rent tallies that match the house's half of the split stick, taxes that show up on the right day wearing the right hat. And there's the seasonal kind, the church's calendar arriving like a tide table. Advent and Lent quieted. Feast eves watched closely. A few saints' days encouraged to mind their own business. When the bells say the lane must pause, shutters answer with obedience that sounds like a sigh and feels like an empty ledger. You watch the beadle pause at a door where a rule has tried to peel away from the nail. He presses it flat with two clean knuckles and moves on. That gesture is the whole philosophy. Keep the paper visible, and the paper keeps people visible to themselves. A woman steps out with a broom held like a peace treaty and brushes the threshold into a rectangle that pleases the eye. The beadle's staff taps twice. Thank you, carry on. And the neighborhood resumes its steady imitation of a quiet street that just happens to be extremely literate in regulations. The clerk's ledger reveals its secret talent. It can frown in numbers. Columns mutter about candles consumed, about shutters that closed a half-hour late, about a watchman's lantern that was given a cup of small beer for arriving before the argument did. Historians still argue whether health checks and civic registers in such districts had meaningful protective power, or mostly served as paper shields. Comfort to authorities, inconvenience to workers, little barrier to disease. You have seen both faces. A midwife with decent herbs, and a city letter stamped bravely with nothing inside but winter. From time to time, a physician in scholar's cap visits with a bag that smells of mint and mercury in a complicated friendship. He speaks of ulcers with the voice one uses for weather, and writes with a hand that gets paid by the syllable. People here cooperate to the degree that promises warmth and not sermons. The rules ask for clean linens. The rooms answer with buckets and rope. The rules forbid dice. The tavern floor adopts sand that quiets both spills and gambling noises. The rules insist on shutters. The shutters learn to rest on bars worn smooth by the same hands season after season. A bell in the parish shakes itself awake to announce a vigil tomorrow night. The clerk draws a line through 2 days of the week, and the room rearranges its expectations. Closures are not just about piety, they're about predictability. If the street darkens in rhythm with the church, there's less excuse for chaos and fewer complaints to the alderman. Your second light joke sidles in. Regulation is like embroidery. You can tell the town's character by how neatly the edges are finished, and whether anyone bothered with the back. Over in the corner, the posted house rules include one line that always makes you nod. No weapons past the threshold. Practicality, not idealism. Knives for bread, yes. Knives for arguments, no. The beadle will enforce this with a calm that comes from years of explaining the difference between a tool and a theater prop. Another line forbids gambling, not because chance is sinful, but because brawls are expensive and furniture has feelings. A third says no shouting from windows, which is less about volume and more about dignity. Voices should go in and out of doors like adults. Your eyes linger on a margin note beside the rules, written in a smaller hand. Keep candles low. Straw is not a friend. Fire fear is the city's oldest memory. The rules once meant cover your fire at curfew, bank the embers, dim the lamp, and the phrase stayed even when the fires learned better manners. You adjust the wick on the table lamp and watch smoke choose to be reasonable. A sign of compliance is as simple as a flame that minds its own circumference. Now and then, the bishop's men take more than a look. They ask questions designed to have only one answer. The clerk supplies it. The law arrives with a voice that is either velvet or stone, and tonight it chooses velvet. Everyone agrees on the price of peace. You sign the register with initials that belong to you most of the time. The quill scratches a small oath in the paper's ear. A gust pushes under the door and tugs at the parchment again. You smooth it, the way the beadle did, because living under rules is easier when they lie flat. Your third gentle joke taps the nail with you. Posted laws are like house cats, useful, decorative, and always exactly where you need to trip over them. Outside, the lane folds its hands as the bells fold the hour. Oversight does not feel like kindness, but it can behave like it, and for tonight, that will do. When you step back into the street, the air smells of ink, tallow, and rain that cannot decide about itself. The beadle nods his punctuation. The clerk closes his book. The parish bell clears its throat for tomorrow. You walk on within the grammar that keeps the night legible, knowing how to pronounce every comma and when to let the sentence rest. You come to the hearth because heat is a currency everyone understands. The room is little more than a box where fire gets a vote, yet it arranges people into a circle the way a bell arranges hours. Shawls migrate from shoulders to chairbacks. Hands thaw and remember they are capable of kindness. Someone pokes the embers with a bedstaff on temporary assignment, and the red coals answer with a soft argument in favor of patience. You take the near stool, the one with a good wobble but honest morals, and let your knees learn the grammar of warmth. This is where the companionship of work becomes the companionship of being alive at the same time. A comb is passed, not to tame vanity, but to negotiate with the small travelers who love wool as much as you do. A cup of small beer makes a slow circuit, then a ladle of broth, then the heel of a loaf that believes in democracy. Your first gentle joke pulls up a chair. The hearth is basically the neighborhood's human resources department. No hiring power, but excellent at grievances and snacks. You untie your kerchief a finger's breadth to give your scalp an opinion, and someone tosses you a pin that looks ordinary but works miracles. The talk, like steam, knows how to fill corners. Stories of the day's odd customers, never cruel, always filed under lessons learned. A rumor about a new beadle who prefers nods to speeches. A laugh at the bathman's ledger, which has developed a smudge shaped like an opinion. Under the chat runs the quiet mutual aid that keeps hard trades survivable. Someone promising to sit with a cough. Someone else offering 2 pins against a future needle. A third admitting she is short on rent and receiving, without a fuss, 3 pennies that have agreed to visit and maybe stay. In some towns, church charities maintained houses for repentance and shelter, Magdalene homes by one name or another, and everybody here knows at least one person who tried that door and found in it either a resting place or a corridor. That is your steady historical fact. Late medieval Europe did see religious foundations aimed at fallen women, sometimes providing food, work, or enclosure, with results as varied as the people who entered. A pot on the trivet whispers in a language made of milk and ale, a posset, thickening into the sort of comfort that believes sleep is a right, not a favor. Tonight someone has added a rind of hard cheese and a clove, extravagance measured in crumbs and scent. There's a ritual to pouring, a little for the one with the knitting cough, a little for the one with cold hands, and a little for the room itself, which drinks by making the air gentler. Your quirky tidbit arrives in a warm mug. Possets and caudles were common night drinks. Milk or ale or wine warmed with eggs, bread, or spice. Prescribed by grand folk in gowns, and perfected by tired people with trivs and good timing. On the bench, a small box of savings sits under a folded shawl. No lock, only a ribbon and a rule. If you can, put something in. If you must, take something out and leave the lid grateful. The rule keeps its dignity, because it is everyone's. Historians still argue whether the support networks among women in regulated quarters amounted to proto-guilds with rules and dues, or were looser, shifting circles of favor and reciprocity. The answer probably depends on the alley and the season, but here, tonight, the circle looks sturdy. You tuck a penny into the box, not because your purse is heavy, but because the shawl covering it looks like a promise you want to keep. A needle flashes in the firelight, the kind of art that saves souls and souls. One woman darns a stocking with the solemn speed of a scribe. Another patches a sleeve where a sleeve always thins, as if the day were a tailor who keeps learning the same lesson. The pin's tin clinks like a polite bell. Someone counts days on a string of knots, planning for the closures to come. And another hums the drone line of a lullaby that never bothered with words. Your second soft joke winks. Minutes of the meeting are being taken in crumbs. And the action items are breathe, mend, and share. A cat strolls in and chooses a lap with the authority of a royal seal. The lap accepts. The hearth approves. A bowl of ash for ashes, a bucket for sparks, and a damp cloth for ambitions. Fire safety by choreography rather than heroics. A tin cup catches the occasional drip from the kettle's lid, the way a good neighbor catches the occasional fallen piece of your day. Against the far wall, a pair of shoes accepts a new coat of grease, because rain does not care how hard you worked. You rub your own boots and feel them grow younger under your fingers. Conversation bends toward learning the neighborhood. The baker who underweights on busy mornings. The fishwife whose prices track the moon. The carpenter who enjoys fixing hinges more than he enjoys being paid. Someone jokes about starting a club for people who can tell time by bells and bread crusts. Plans for tomorrow hatch and settle. Who will accompany whom after dusk? Who has the better watch route? Who will trade an afternoon shift for a morning run to the laundress with arms like oars? Maps of safety are drawn invisibly on the floorboards and memorized with the ease of people who know they need one another to get home. A door in the passage opens a thumb width and closes again. The house takes attendance by sound and declares the evening intact. You pass the comb back and it returns with fewer worries in it. You tie the kerchief a thought tighter, the knot remembering the lesson from the last windy corner. The posset finds your mouth and rearranges the temperature of your gratitude. Somewhere under the chair, a bead from a broken rosary waits to become a counting tool, or a game piece for a game no one pretends is gambling. The talk glides to dreams you let yourselves say out loud near a fire. A tiny alehouse with a floor that recognizably isn't sticky. A room with a window that opens to the river without admitting the cold. A curtain that remembers to fall just so. You do not chase miracles, you scale them to shawl size. A list is made in the mind. More pins, better thread, a second spoon so guests don't have to pretend sharing isn't intimate. Your third gentle joke nods at the cat. Every strategy meeting needs an executive asleep on the agenda. When the fire settles into its red breath stage, the circle unwinds in reverse. Shawls return to shoulders. Pins test their loyalties. Cups find the wash basin by sound. The box under the shawl grows heavier by a coin and lighter by a worry. You rise with the stiffness of warmth well spent and the lightness of a plan that doesn't require trumpets. The hearth has done its office, made the night workable, stitched the room into a quilt where nobody is the cold corner. You step back into the corridor where the door latch knows your hand. Behind you, the fire puts itself to bed, and in front of you, a quieter darkness admits your candle without argument. Companionship follows like heat does, soft, inevitable, stored in fabric and breath. You carry it the way one carries a pin, small, sharp, exactly enough to keep the day from falling apart. You read the night the way sailors read clouds, by edges and by temperament. Before you step out, you bar the latch so it remembers which side of the door is yours. The iron tongue slides into the keeper with a click that means you have taught the room its manners. The shutter rests against a bar that once was a broom handle and now is a philosophy. A gap between plank and jamb admits a ribbon of lamplight from the corridor. You pinch it shut with a fold of cloth the way a seamstress pinches gossip. A good door doesn't brag, it simply behaves. You stand a moment and let your ears take inventory. The house knows its people by gait and by cough. Floorboards translate the upstairs neighbor's opinion on boots. In the lane, someone tests a latch twice, the universal dialect of caution, and a watchman clears his throat in a rhythm that says he is bored enough to be diligent. Your steady historical fact steps forward with its badge on. Medieval towns fielded night watches, constables, beadles, or hired watchmen, who made rounds, enforced curfew, and responded to the hue and cry, that legal shout which required neighbors to help pursue wrongdoers. The system worked best when everyone agreed that sleep was worth protecting and paperwork was to be avoided. Lantern light is weather in these streets. You learn the horn panes of a lantern, thin, scraped, translucent, will glow like cream when the wick is modest and flare to butter yellow when a problem is trying to invent itself. Candlelight behind linen looks like evening. Candlelight behind horn looks like a decision. Yours tonight is trimmed low, wick snipped neat with your thumbnail. You cup the flame and let the shadow of your hand become a traveling roof. Your first soft joke sidles in with the draft. You are basically a small meteorologist equipped with one candle and a talent for barometers that smell of tallow. The alley outside has 2 moods and 4 exits. You count them both. A water butt stands where rain collects and tempers arguments. Crates lean against a wall at angles that would make a carpenter sigh, and a sprained ankle introduce itself. You move a crate with the kind of courtesy that prevents future biographies. Above, a window sticks an elbow of light into the lane. Below, a cat files a report in cursive. You step to the wall and let your back learn brick. Watchmen like people who make their shapes predictable. Doors in this quarter are biographies written in hardware. A drawbar slot across the back of a plank door says the house learned from the last loud night. A sneck, that neat latch you lift with a forefinger, says the carpenter liked elegance more than drama. Old nails are clenched on the reverse, so their points curve back into the wood. Dead as a doornail, carpenters say, because a clinched nail cannot be reused. That's your quirky tidbit. The phrase rides out of workshops and into literature, stubborn as iron that's been hammered into obedience. You pat the head of a nail with the fondness of someone who appreciates retired heroes. Across the lane, A watchman's lantern writes a moving comma on the ground. He walks like a man who believes in commas, pauses placed exactly where sense requires. You nod. He nods. He prefers quiet to reports. And so do you. He lifts the lid of his lantern a finger's breadth to show he is not a ghost. You lower yours a touch to show you are not a problem. 2 taps, his staff on stone, then your knuckle on wood, complete the etiquette. Historians still argue whether such urban policing truly reduced violence or merely displaced it, whether order came from law or from communities keeping their own peace. At this hour, what matters is that nods are cheaper than bruises. You have a route for nights like this. Keep to edges, borrow light without borrowing trouble, and let your steps be a suggestion rather than an announcement. Where the lane narrow lips into darkness, you pause and listen for the sound of breath on stone, the tell that a person is waiting rather than passing. You carry nothing shiny and everything useful. A short knife for bread and rope, a pin for fabric and emergencies, a folded piece of salt to bribe stains into behaving, and a coin in a pocket that forgot how to open quickly. Your second gentle joke does a stealthy bow. Preparedness is just anxiety with good posture. A door opens 2 fingers wide and closes again. You read in that tiny motion the health of the night. No panic, only a question asked and answered. A beadle turns into the alley long enough to become an alibi, then continues toward someone else's comma. From a tavern, muffled singing argues with sanded floors designed to drink sound as much as ale. A cask rolls, decides against it, and stops with a thump that has the decency not to echo. Somewhere a dog makes a comment and a second dog agrees to disagree. When trouble does try to bloom, and it does, because nights are gardens, you rely on choreography more than courage. Step sideways into a doorway with neighbors behind you, not alone. Keep the wall at your back and your eyes at ankle height, where feet reveal intention before faces do. Speak plainly and briefly, the way tally marks speak about sums. If a drunk decides the lane is a debate hall, you let the watchman win the argument by arriving. If the watchman is late, you let your voice pick up the old law's thread and shout once. Clearly, the hue and cry asks the street to wake up and be itself, a community with opinions about furniture and bones. You also keep a door code at home, invented by people who would rather not surprise each other. 3 small taps. Arriving. 2 slow taps. Arriving with company. 1 long, patient tap. Arriving with a story that needs tea. You have never knocked the last one without a kettle answering. A city is a network of replies. At the corner where the alley meets the river path, a lantern has been hung from a nail at just the right height to warn boats about a low cart. It swings a little, which is all that's needed to say, "Mind your wheel, mind your keel, mind your mouth." It makes you think of other signals, a kerchief folded twice instead of once, a shawl pinned higher than usual, a candle in the back window rather than the front, that carry meanings agreed on over soup and silence. The best precaution is often the least theatrical. You circle back, counting your steps to match the stones you trust. The wall under your palm feels like a friend who doesn't chatter. The door receives your hand like a host who remembers your name. Inside, you set the bar with a care that isn't fear, it's simply policy. Then you check the window latch, slide the small bolt that lives like a psalm behind the hinge, and lay the bedstaff where your hand will find it even without courage. Your third soft joke yawns from the corner. Home security is mostly the art of never hunting for your shoes in the dark. The house exhales when you do. Outside, the watchman's comma travels on, making sentences elsewhere. Your candle grades down to ember, to echo, to the faintest memory of flame on the wick. Risk isn't something you beat, it's something you budget for. On the tally stick, in the pouch, in the way your feet choose routes, and your hands choose where to rest. You listen for one last hinge in the corridor. Hear it, and let the night close like a book that has decided to read you to sleep. The house is quiet enough that small cures feel brave. You set a shallow bowl on the table, pour in warm water, and let rosemary release its green grammar. The steam climbs like advice you can breathe. Tonight isn't a drama, it's maintenance. Salves for skin that met the day too closely. Rinses for a throat that remembered the market dust. Cautions whispered like lullabies. You unfold a square of linen and smile at its confidence. Cloth believes in second chances. You start with the herb box. Rosemary for rinses, sage for sore mouths, thyme for stubborn coughs, a pinch of rue when you want the air to think twice about mischief. A mortar leans in, patient as an old friend, and the pestle writes circles until scents agree to cooperate. Here's your steady historical fact. Ordinary people in medieval towns leaned on humoral medicine and household herb lore, balancing hot-cold, dry-wet, using wine, vinegar, honey, and herbs noted in leech books, while barber surgeons bled or cupped, and apothecaries compounded salves. The system wasn't modern, but it was method. It offered a framework that made discomfort less lonely. A dab of honey joins the salve, not only because bees are excellent chemists, but because honey minds its manners on wounds, moist, protective, and politely antibacterial before anyone had the word. You stir in a sigh of wine vinegar to wake the mixture and whisper to the skin that tomorrow will be friendlier. Your first soft joke taps the rim. If good manners were medicine, vinegar would be the etiquette teacher with a very tidy ledger. On the shelf sits a small bag of cloves, extravagant in scent and stingy in number. One clove can boss a whole pot, a power you admire from a safe distance. You tuck it away and reach for chamomile instead, steeps that ask less of the coin and more of patience. The kettle obliges, and the room's temperature rises by the size of a smile. Overhead, the beam collects another crescent of smoke, a faint library of all the evenings you decided discomfort didn't require a sermon, just warm water and a chair. When the body complains more loudly, the neighborhood has midwives whose hands know the clocks inside other people. They arrive with satchels that smell of linseed, mugwort, and linen that learned about boiling water the hard way. They keep cords, pins, and confidence, plus a voice that can make panic remember its manners. You think of the girdles some women borrow or wear in hope, a ribbon blessed by a saint's altar, or the story of one, tied not because cloth performs miracles, but because courage sometimes needs a handle. Historians still argue whether professional midwives formed consistent, regulated networks across towns, or whether most care remained neighborly and informal, changing street by street. The truth likely rides the line between pattern and person. On a nail by the hearth hangs a pomander, a little ball pierced with stars, stuffed with herbs, sometimes with a sliver of resin. Because air loves to pretend it can be curated. You roll it in your palm. The scent walks the perimeter like a gentle guard. A quirky tidbit for the night. Some people consulted urine wheels, painted charts used by uroscopists, to match colors and smells to diagnoses. A respectable jar on a window ledge could start more conversations than a market crier. You don't keep a wheel, but you can read a jar well enough to announce drink water without sounding like a magistrate. There are heavier tools if caution fails. Cupping glasses leave round souvenirs on backs that swear they feel better afterward. Bleeding takes a quantity agreed upon by custom and persuasion, then argues for balance with a tidy bandage. An apothecary will sell mercurial ointments with the silver pride of a dangerous friend. Later hailed against certain sores, later still whispered about in regret. You keep a respectful distance. Remedies have personalities, and some are divas. Your second gentle joke bows. Somewhere a jar of unguent is writing its memoirs. How I saved everyone and also set the curtains on fire. Across the table lies the saint's map of the city. Shrines where the line to donate is also the line to exhale. A ribbon for St. Margaret if you want doors to open gently. A token from St. Bridget when you wish threads would behave. A badge from Our Lady because seas are not the only things that storm. You don't confuse ritual with pharmacy, you braid them. A candle can argue with fear while an herb argues with phlegm, and you'll take both advocates. Thank you. Sometimes advice arrives in a barber's shop, all striped pole and efficient chatter. He will trim more than hair if invited, lance a boil that collects complaints, pull a tooth that has learned how to shout. He will praise possets and warn against drafts, sell you a little vial of something whose contents are 80% willow and 20% hope. You accept with the kind of skepticism that still drinks the tea. The rules posted in the hall: no shouting, no blades, mind the candles, feel cousin to your remedies. All of them try to persuade chaos to schedule itself. You prepare a fomentation, cloth wrung from hot water, folded and held where muscles believe they are the city wall. Heat negotiates, tightness eventually signs. The kettle rattles like a clerk who wants his lunch, and you set it back to ponder. In the mortar, you grind a more serious salve. Plantain leaf for skin that wishes it were younger. Calendula if the purse allowed. A whisper of oak bark for confidence. You spread the paste on a clean strip of linen, tie it in place, and decide that medicine is often just tidiness plus faith, tied with a knot that can be retied at midnight. There are taboos too. Don't sleep with wet hair if the wind is judgmental. Don't stand barefoot on stone that remembers winter. Don't let the candle scold the curtain. You keep those not because physics wrote them, but because experience did. Historians still argue whether ordinary people misunderstood disease or simply understood risk management in their own vocabulary. Smoke against smells, distance against coughs, fresh air when the street allowed it. You call it prudence and return the window to its favorite amount of open. By the time you finish packing the herb box, the room smells like a garden that learned to read. You set the midwife's fee aside in coin and cloth, a tiny retainer that says tomorrow will not find you flat-footed. Your third soft joke yawns. Self-care in this century is mostly water, patience, and the determination not to argue with your blanket. You bank the fire to amber and watch the last kettle sigh itself sensible. The salve sits where it can be remembered. The cup cools to kindness. The pomander resumes its quiet patrol. Outside, the night walks on cat feet. Inside, your tools of comfort complete their rounds. You lie down feeling less like a battlefield and more like a house that passed inspection. Remedies promise comfort more than cures, and comfort just now is the best kind of medicine. Warm, breathable, and exactly your size. The city wakes differently on a market day, as if someone lifted the lid on a bigger pot. You feel it first in the bells, which sound less like piety and more like permission. Stalls bloom along the lanes, bright under awnings patched to a philosophy of color, and the air decides to be a cookbook. Pepper from a distant pouch, yeast from a local vat, fish announcing their ancestry with sincere enthusiasm. Your steps learn a sidestep you didn't know you owned, a dance for when baskets and elbows have their own opinions. At the square, a line of carts performs a patient parade. A piper stitches the crowd together with a tune that knows how to loop. A troupe of mummers bargains for a corner with clean cobbles. A juggler calculates his courage against the wind. You thread the edge where the cloth merchants nail their measuring tapes to boards, L's and half-L's ready to prevent arguments. Here is your steady historical fact. Chartered fairs and weekly markets in medieval towns operated under civic or royal licenses, with officials enforcing standard weights and measures, bushels, gallons, ells, and collecting stallage or tolls. Some great fairs, like those of Champagne, once drew international merchants under special protections and safe conducts. The clerk who minds the measures has the smile of a man who knows exactly which gallon is too generous to be legal. You price thread with a finger and your best unbothered face, then let your eyes go window shopping for the future. A peddler rattles tinware like bells, selling ladles, mirrors the size of a sensible biscuit, and needles wrapped in a ribbon that pretends to be a promise. The bread stall carries loaves with shoulders as square as good intentions, stamped to prove the assize still has teeth even when bakers have moods. Your first light joke strolls by in an apron. The difference between hearty rustic loaf and short-weight fine is exactly one inspector wearing boots. A booth of spices smells like long stories told quickly. Cinnamon preens, ginger flirts, pepper acts like it discovered the tongue, and saffron arrives late in a yellow that believes in itself. You don't buy tonight. Coin is for rent and soup, but you let your lungs borrow the perfume and feel briefly wealthier than your pouch allows. At a small table, a scribe writes names on packets for the generous, flour-dusted hands of people who deserve small luxuries. Farther on, the dyer's stall makes a minor sunrise with skeins of madder and weld. Your kerchief nods in chromatic solidarity from the other end of the spectrum. The square's center hosts a little theater of weights. The iron set sits like a family portrait, each piece shaped to fit the scale's affection. A visiting merchant argues centimeter feelings in a town that speaks ounces. The bailiff taps a weight with his rod, and the discussion learns its ending. You watch quietly, grateful for rules that can be pointed at rather than invented. A woman at the next stall sells gingerbread, not the piped frills of later centuries, but the medieval kind. Honey, breadcrumb, spice, pressed into wooden molds that kiss saints and beasts onto the surface. That's your quirky tidbit for the day. Molded gingerbread was sold at fairs as fairings, stamped with images from faith or folklore, a sweet souvenir you could eat before you felt guilty about it. You buy the smallest square and discover it tastes like warmth learned a rhyme. Beyond the food, the fair wants to be a newsroom. Sailors talk tariffs to anyone with ears. Wool men quote fleece like poets quote rain. A messenger reads a proclamation with a voice that thinks of itself as taller than its owner. You absorb only what helps you price the week. Shoes dearer after storms, candles cheaper when the bees remember their chores, thread twitchy because a wagon overturned by the north gate. Historians still argue whether the rise of permanent shopkeeping and guild retail in later medieval towns choked the old traveling fair into festivity rather than finance, or whether fairs adapted into seasonal peaks atop a growing daily market. Your ledger cares less about theory than about whether pins outnumber excuses. A minstrel gives the crowd a ballad with more refrain than plot. The refrain works. Children make a river of their own, flowing around ankles with the hydrology of utter purpose. A fellow with a hobby horse performs a sideways miracle of balance and self-respect. His hat collects coins while pretending to be shy. You keep to the elbows of things, where business happens with fewer witnesses. The tanner's corner, all oak bark and hard hands, sells scraps big enough to teach your pouch about longevity. The cobbler holds up a roll of grease that will turn your boots into better citizens. You weigh want against need, and let need win by a polite inch. On market days that grow into fairs, the evening promises spectacle. A small platform pretends to be a stage. Someone in a crimson hood claims to know plays about saints with excellent timing. A miracle story begins to rehearse in the air. Lamplight ready to turn into halo at a nod, a painted cloth prepared to become a tomb, a jug practiced at not leaking before it must pretend to become wine. You stand at the respectable distance that allows wonder to work and skepticism to nap. Near the edge, the exchanger sits with scales and a look that forgives no imprecision. Your lead tokens will not impress him, but he will swap clipped smalls for larger certainty if you bring him patience and a witness. You track bargains like constellations. 2 pins for the price of regret. A spool of thread that behaves like a friend. A second-hand shawl whose fringe still remembers dancing. You tuck away a little fresh cheese, salted enough to travel home, with bread that smells like the idea of a field. Your second soft joke grins from the crust. Bread is just agriculture wearing cologne. The fishwife explains the river's mood in 3 sentences and a gesture. You applaud internally and buy nothing, because ale has already applied for the job of being supper's company. The fair is also a school for caution. Pickpockets carry their own curriculum. You assign your pouch a chaperone, your elbow. The watch circles like commas in a long sentence. A bell rings to warn of a cart, and also to announce that someone is about to sell something that might be a miracle, or might be soap. A tooth drawer waves a pair of gleaming instruments like flags and swears he has never missed. You pray for his customers and drift away with unusual speed. A cloth seller lifts a bolt no one can afford, and everyone chooses to admire instead. As dusk rehearses for evening, torches turn the fair into constellations at knee height. Smoke lifts and braids with the piper's tune. You count your change twice, once with eyes and once with fingers, because crowds borrow arithmetic and sometimes forget to return it. You've bought what the ledger allows: grease for boots, a packet of thick linen thread, a handful of pins that sit in your palm like a polite army, and the small square of gingerbread that has already argued successfully for optimism. You also bought, without coin, the sense that the city belongs to more than its narrow lanes. Today it belongs to its river of faces, to the argument of supply and appetite, to the small treaty between strangers who want the same corner without wanting the same trouble. On your way home, the mummers finally win their corner, and the first laugh lands like a coin in a cup. A juggler drops nothing and everyone notices anyway. The piper finds a tune that matches your walk, and the bells offer a curfew with excellent timing. You carry the market in your shawl and your breath, the salt, the spice, the noise that does not bruise, and your coin in its accustomed pocket, slightly fewer but more convinced of their duties. Your third gentle joke rides along. Budgeting is just storytelling where every character is a penny with a backstory. The lane receives you with the relief of fewer elbows. Your door recognizes the hour and decides to be gracious. Inside, you set the small purchases on the chest like new vocabulary, ready to be learned. The city goes on selling and singing without you for a while. It will remember to stop. You bank the little fire, unpin the kerchief with the care it deserves, and think, with something like gratitude, that fairs make the ledger breathe faster, but also make the heart remember why it keeps books at all. You keep a habit the city can't tax. You hide a coin before you count the rest. The scrap of cloth waits behind the belt seam. The stitch turns away like a door that promises not to gossip. And the small round weight joins its brothers with the tact of a guest who knows this is a long visit. Savings are not romance. They are quiet engineering. 1 penny made safe against the night you don't get to choose. You smooth the seam flat and feel a courage that looks exactly like thread. On the chest lid, you lay out a ledger that pretends to be humble. 3 columns, must, maybe, and someday. Into must go rent, candles, soap, bread. Into maybe go pins, better thread, boot grease. Into someday goes a drawing so simple even hope can read it. A tiny alehouse with a swept floor, 4 sturdy stools, a shelf of cups that clink like praise, and a broom by the door that never once has to be used as a weapon. You do not need miracles. You need a room where the math is polite. There are steps between wish and door latch. You learn the assize of bread and ale like a lullaby sung by clerks. You practice your sums so measures cannot flirt with trouble. You ask a cooper what a second-hand ton might cost, and whether its rings will hold if you promise them good behavior. A brewer's lad tells you where the river runs truest. A maltster shows you how barley should break between finger and thumb. And the dyer's wife sells you a linen strainer cheap, because hope looks better when it drains properly. Your first soft joke nods without moving its hat. Entrepreneurship is just housekeeping with paperwork. Here is your steady historical fact. In many medieval towns, women brewed and sold ale, as brewsters or alewives, especially at the household scale. City officers tasted and fined. Measures were checked, signs were hung, and a small alehouse could be as ordinary as a bread oven that also told jokes. Some widows kept taverns under their own names. Some married their business partners. Some traded brewing seasons with neighbors like shifts at a communal fire. You collect stories the way you collect spoons, carefully, and only the ones that will not bend when the stew thickens. Your plan fits inside a day. Brew smell in the morning, light music by afternoon, lanterns steady by evening, shutters respectful to the bell. You sketch a menu honest enough to be trusted. Pottage with a name you can say in one breath. Bread you can hear under a knife. Cheese cut by weight, not whim. Ale that doesn't pretend to be a sermon. You note which corner keeps its shadow in summer, which window forgives the winter drafts, which bench talks back when sand is low. Furniture has opinions. You listen because rent does too. You keep tokens from the bathhouse and notes from regulars who trade labor for soup. A ship's carpenter offers to fix your hinge for 2 jugs and the right to hum. A laundress says she will bring 3 honest customers if you promise the ale won't argue. You learn credit like a language. Written when necessary, spoken when possible, paid in coin or in small miracles. A seam fixed before shame finds it. A seat kept for a man who only knows the old songs. Historians still argue whether late medieval guild pressures pushed women out of brewing as hops rose and capital costs grew, or whether women shifted voluntarily into service and tavern management, while men took over larger-scale beer. You intend to stand where the street still leaves room for hands, heat, and a barrel that minds its manners. You consider hops, those green commas imported with accents from the Low Countries, and decide your house will stay with barley's old friends a while longer. Beer that travels is for merchants with broad shoulders, but ale that bears its warm throat to the evening is what your lane understands. A quirky tidbit lands at your door with the lightness of evergreen. To show ale for sale, a house might hang out a bush, pole, or broom, an ale stake, so passers-by could drink by sign, not by rumor. The proverb says, good drink needs no bush, but a modest one never hurts. You picture a simple broom bound neat and high, less for advertising than for tidy floors. Your preferred theology. There's the question of papers, of course. A clerk will want his fee, and his proof you can count to the town's satisfaction. You practice your fractions on pebbles until your fingers can explain them to his pen. You rehearse the polite refusals every keeper must know. No blades, no dice, no shouting, and no pretending your cousin may sleep under the table. You memorize 2 speeds of voice, one for laughter, one for rules, and test them on the kettle until the water boils exactly when it should. The beadle, when told of your plan, says he prefers establishments that sweep before he asks. You assure him your broom is ambitious. Even an alehouse begins with hidden coins. You tuck them under hems and behind belt seams, string them on thread and pass them as if they were ordinary buttons. Edge a cloak with a quiet jingle that only you can hear. A friend offers to hold 2 for you in her shawl box under the hearth, with the rule that no one asks for them unless a window breaks or a winter does. You accept because trust is lighter than rent and heavier than hunger. Your second soft joke warms its hands at the brazier. Capital is just courage wearing a coin purse. At the hearth, you sketch floors you could wash in one song, tables you could level with one folded chip, a doorway you could see from everywhere. You choose a place for a psalm board, because some customers will need to pray before they remember how to eat. You choose a place for the mop, because some customers will forget how to hold a cup. Your future apron understands both. You promise yourself the room will be dressed like decent conversation, never sticky, always patient, ready to forgive a clumsy joke. There are exits besides business. Marriage if kindness comes wearing boots. Service if a respectable household wants hands that already know how to keep books and floors. A place in a charity house if the body prefers quiet to income. You do not pretend all doors open to the same corridor. You simply practice turning handles without fear. The alehouse plan is not a defiance. It is a translation of your skill at counting, cleaning, listening, and keeping the peace between cups and people. When the ledger tires, you practice closing time in your head. A last cup measured to the mark, the bench turned up, the broom making its deliberate music, the candle's wick pinched into smoke that smells like bedtime. You picture a lock that fits without sulking, and a window that admits morning like a letter it has been expecting. Your third soft joke raises its mug. If hope had a flavor, it would be small beer with excellent manners. You fold the drawing and tuck it into the ledger where someday lives, then add one more coin to the seam because routines make futures. Outside, the river strokes the quay. Inside, the room learns the shape of tomorrow in your hands. A tiny alehouse is only a dozen sensible decisions in a row, repeated. You have learned to do harder things while pretending you were merely mending. You bank the fire, pat the seam, and let the dark practice being safe. A habit you intend to sell by the cup, one evening soon. The calendar turns its great key, and the quarter learns how to be quiet on command. Lent arrives not with thunder but with instructions, and the street complies the way a well-trained hinge complies, reluctantly at first, then with a professionalism that could be mistaken for faith. Notices go up. Shutters rehearse closing at brighter hours. Ledgers draw a thin, careful breath. You tidy the room as if a guest were coming who prefers silence to conversation. The scent of soap becomes a creed. Ash sits on foreheads like a punctuation mark that everyone agrees to read. The bell's voice acquires a new sort of gravity, and the lanes adjust their costumes. More gray shawls, fewer red ribbons, a parade of faces that have decided to look inward, where the weather cannot eavesdrop. The steady historical fact rests comfortably here. In several European towns, London's Southwark among them, authorities ordered bathhouses and brothels to close during Lent and certain holy days, with fines or expulsion for defiance. The rule is older than your landlord's patience, and it makes the night feel taller than usual. Commerce does not die. It shrinks into acceptable shapes. You learn the art of occupying a day without letting it occupy you. Floors receive the kind of attention that would impress a bishop. Linen is washed into diplomacy. You inventory pins, count candles, mend hems, and manage the budget like a captain sighting shoals. Small beer becomes thin ale, more sermon than celebration. And bread behaves as if it is aware of the term plain. Your first gentle joke knocks politely. Even your stew chooses the modest path and leaves its herbs at home to contemplate their life choices. Work shifts in ways the register never learned to spell. Some women hire on briefly as seamers, mending, turning gowns, coaxing old cloth into serviceable futures. Others help at taverns that keep to the letter of sobriety, while quietly practicing hospitality, because no rule has yet outlawed kindness. You take in a little extra laundry from a clerk, who has a complicated conscience and uncomplicated collars. Coins arrive thinner and more polite, as if they too have been to confession and intend to avoid clinking. The city indulges in pageantry of restraint. Processions move at a pace that allows the cobbles to understand the message. Candles stand straighter. A preacher borrows the square to remind everyone that desire should be scheduled for later. Even the pigeons look like they're taking notes. Historians still argue whether these seasonal closures were enforced with real severity or mainly performed as civic morality, paper fences policed by custom, while ordinary life rearranged itself behind curtains. Your experience says enforcement works best where neighbors value sleep more than scandal and where beadles prefer nods to speeches. There is, however, a threshold festival before the quiet sets in. Call it Shrovetide, call it Carnival, call it the city, remembering that laughter exists. Somewhere, a bell rings the pancake hour, and kitchens answer with pan and batter. The joke is older than every apron. That's your quirky tidbit. In parts of England, the Shrove Tuesday pancake bell traditionally summoned people to confession, and by happy accident, to frying pans, so houses could use up fats before fasting. You smile at the practicality. Theology escorted by butter. Then the music folds itself up, and the city does its best impression of a monastery that misplaced the vows, but kept the timetable. Days under closures have their own choreography. Windows open to respectable widths. Voices travel in smaller parcels. The beadle walks the quarter with a staff that says, "I'm listening," more loudly than it says, "I'm angry." He checks shutters that behave, posts that hold, doorways that resemble unambitious furniture. You greet him with the kind of nod that pays a bill invisibly. He returns it, because nods are the currency of these 40 days. You discover that planning is a sacrament by another name. The seam behind your belt delivers a modest dividend, 3 coins that feel like a vote of confidence. You ration candles to evenings when mending matters more than mood. You trade a neighbor for a measure of oat groats and repay her with a morning of scrubbing that makes the yard applaud. You keep your hands busy so your mind doesn't try to renegotiate the season with the calendar. Your second soft joke puts its feet on the fender. Austerity is basically budgeting with better PR. A different set of doors open in Lent. The almonry at the priory, the porch bench at a guild hall where scraps of work are handed out with instructions to be grateful. You stand in line with fishwives and porters and men from the ferry whose shoulders look suddenly unemployed. Relief tastes of pottage thinner than memory, but it carries enough warmth to be convincing. A sister from a charity house recognizes you from a January fever and slips you an extra loaf with a face that dares you to be proud. Pride loses the argument, and the loaf survives the walk home only by promising to be supper. The quarter acquires new sounds. Without tavern brawls to insult the moon, you can hear the river barge its way through the night and the cat write its cursive without interruption. You set aside a tithe of stitches for the poor box kept under a shawl, because scarcity argues for generosity more persuasively than abundance ever could. The box eats coins and worries and occasionally produces a miracle in which a widow's rent is paid, and nobody knows how to announce it without blushing. Intention becomes a material. You add it to water when you scour tables, to thread when you reinforce seams, to the day when the day tries to become a complaint. You practice being tractable without feeling erased. The lanes practice being sober without becoming cruel. When the preacher's voice finds your window, you let the words pass through like sunlight. You do not chase them. You borrow what warms and return the rest to the street. A thought keeps you good company while the shutters are modest. Even a closed quarter knows how to be useful. You draft the alehouse plan again, clearer now that noise has been trimmed away. You note which neighbors prove resourceful under stricter rules. They will be excellent patrons and better advisors. You discover that a quieter night's sleep is not always an enemy, and that a morning without urgency contains more energy than you expected. When the bell finally loosens its jaw and the notices tremble toward removal, the quarter does not explode. It exhales. Curtains breathe deeper. Doors practice hospitality like a remembered hymn. Beadles resume their ordinary speed, the one that suggests nothing is wrong and everything is being observed anyway. Your third gentle joke finishes tying its apron. Even the cat looks ready to return to its normal levels of mischief, which is to say, advanced. You count what the season taught you. The worth of stored candles, the grace of neighbors who think in plural, the skill of entertaining a long pause without letting it become a fear. The lane did not vanish. It learned how to fold itself smaller and still be a lane. You bank the tiny fire, straighten the kerchief that performed at a lower volume, and listen as the city moves from hush into murmur. The rules did their work, imperfectly and predictably. So did you. Dawn finds the river before it finds you, laying a pale seam of tin along the water and turning the keystones into cold loaves. You step out, and the air tastes like new iron and old bread. The mist, having worked the night shift with quiet professionalism, files its last report and goes home. Boats nudge one another like sleepy cattle. A gull, very sure of its union rights, complains on schedule. You move where the light collects, at the edges of doorways, in the cups of cobbles, on the lids of barrels that learn to dream upright. The city performs its opening routine with a competence that would make saints applaud politely. A bell from the parish tells the hour like a calm ant. A raker drags his twig broom along the gutter, persuading last night to stop being everyone's problem. Two lads roll a cask with the patience of monks moving a relic. A baker cracks a door and releases theology in the shape of warm air. Here's your steady historical fact. By first light in many medieval towns, rakers and gong men carted refuse toward lay stalls outside the walls, while market stallers took their licensed spots and parish bells coordinated the day's first orders. The cleanup and setup were as regulated as any sermon. You watch the order arrive the way bread arrives, by habit and heat. You pass a shrine niche with a little glass and a little candle that has outlived itself by optimism alone. Someone has left a sprig of rosemary there that refuses to look tired. Across the lane, a woman lifts her shutter so gently, you suspect she has a contract with the hinges. A fishwife tests her voice with a hum and then tunes it to price. The cries of trade begin, measured, practiced, designed to be heard without starting fights. Your first light joke yawns. If the city were an instrument, the fishwives would be the tuning fork and bakers the metronome. On the river stairs, a boatman knots a rope with one hand and yesterday's thoughts with the other. His cap has learned your face. It tips with professional indifference. A beadle off duty carries his staff like a sleeping dog and decides to be a man on an errand instead of a man who makes other men behave. The fog has gone, but its absence still thinks in sentences. You walk them. Subject, verb, object. Stone, shoe, step. You turn down a lane that runs thin as a ribbon between houses that lean like confidants. A cathedral farther off lets loose a longer sound, the kind that climbs, folds, and returns as soft authority. People step out with lists in their hands and lists in their heads. Bread, pins, a word with a cousin, a visit to a clerk who counts slowly, a favor returned, a favor banked. You take stock the way ledgers do, without drama, with startling honesty. The pouch at your waist approves. Coin for bread, coin for soap, coin with a future stitched around it like a hem. Near the bridge approach, a mason's boy stretches like someone paid to hold up the horizon and then goes to fetch lime. A cart tips and thinks better of it. Over an alley arch, a chalk mark you've learned to read says the watch passed twice and had nothing to complain about. Your second soft joke leans on a bollard. Peace is when the complaints book can be used as a doorstop. A thought slides in with the sun. Not all stories end where they began. Some drift, some dock, some turn into other rooms with other rules. Some find a small door marked with broom and cup, and decide to stand there welcoming until their legs learn the meaning of evening. You carry the outline of that door the way one carries a hidden coin. Weight small, significance large. You have your list. Broom, cups, a latch that refuses drama, a corner that makes ordinary faces look better than they slept. By the bridge wall, a woman straightens a kerchief the color of regulation and tucks a loose hair that refuses to learn policy. She nods to you, not as a confession, but as a weather report. Clear morning, small breeze, coins possible. Historians still argue whether burial grounds like crossbones by the riverside truly served chiefly the outcast, Winchester geese, as later rumor had it, or whether the association hardened in post-medieval memory. Stones have limited commentary, but they keep dates faithfully. You take off your cap a heartbeat for the unknowns and put it back on for the knowns, rent, linen, soup, and the day that has already begun. A bell in a nearby priory lists the offices it intends to keep and the sins it intends to forget by supper. The street answers by existing. Stallboards land with a clack that means commerce. Bolts of cloth hoist their colors like flags at a siege you are rooting for. A lute finds 3 notes and decides to be brave. You tuck your shawl a fraction tighter and take your place inside the grammar the city writes for those who pay attention. Verbs of carrying and mending. Adverbs of kindly and quietly. Nouns with handles. You cross the little square where last night's steam once rehearsed its halo on the eaves. The bathhouse door stands shut but forgiving. You can still smell mint trying to make morning taste like a memory. Somebody has chalked a heart on the sill, and somebody else has put an X through it. And somebody else, persistent as yeast, has added a smaller heart that ignores geometry. Your third light joke smiles without showing teeth. The city's love letters are written in chalk because permanence is for rent only. And so you walk, matching your breath to the river's small instructions, carrying the unremarkable majesty of survival. Rope tightened, straw fluffed, kerchief folded, coin hidden, ledger balanced not perfectly, but sincerely. The quarter exhales, the larger city inhales, and between those rhythms you find the space in which a person can stand, close a door gently, open a window reasonably, and mean every stitch they make. You step onto the river stones, let your shoulders lower by a year, and watch day happen without asking your permission. It asks only for your attendance, and you give it freely, because you are practiced in the dignities that do not need to be announced. Let the morning thin into a softer color now. Let the bells grow small, as if someone has moved them farther up a quiet hill and wrapped them in wool. You are still walking, but only in the way a thought walks, without feet, without being late for anything. The keystones take their cool back from your soles, the air passes over your shoulders like an understanding hand, and the river smooths its voice until it is mostly breath. Bring the room back, simply. The latch that knows your touch, the bed that remembers how straw can behave when treated kindly, the small soap with round corners, the shawl folded to the same square every evening because repetition is its own kind of safety. Let the ledger close in your mind the way lids close over eyes that have seen enough and needn't report anymore. You set a cup, not for tea, not for ale, just for the idea of warmth, on the table where light gathers without hurry. Outside, a gull negotiates with the wind and then forgets what the argument was about. Somebody far away laughs once, the gentle kind of laugh people use before the day has decided whether to be busy. You match your breath to the neat rhythm of that unseen broom in the lane. Draw in, carry, lay down, draw in, carry, lay down, until even the broom forgets it is working and believes it is a tide. Nothing urgent asks anything of you now. The kerchief can stay folded, the coin can stay hidden, the pins can rest in their starry box. The house keeps time for you with tiny gestures, the cooling of a hearthstone, the last scent of rosemary becoming memory, the rope of the bed holding just enough. If you need a story to finish, let it finish like this. Door closed gently, window open by a finger, the city breathing for itself, and you, for once, not having to supervise. Let your shoulders become a sentence with fewer commas. Let your jaw put down its tools. Let your eyes choose darkness the way sailors choose a good harbor, because they recognize it, because it has held before. Sleep arrives without insisting. It lays its palm across your forehead and says the simple thing, the honest thing. Rest now. The river will remember the rest of the words.